Welcome, brave souls. I am your guide into the realm of the unknown. Here, among these ancient tombstones and whispering trees, we uncover the most intriguing and terrifying stories that will send shivers down your spine. Encounter the supernatural in real life. Each story will transport you to a world where fear reigns and the line between the living and the dead blurs. Are you ready to face your fears? Let the stories begin. Nestled deep within the foreboding forests of New England, Blackwood Manor had been abandoned for over a century. The once grand mansion now stood in a state of ruin, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. Local legends spoke of a dark curse that befell the house, a curse that claimed the lives of anyone who dared to enter. The story began in the early 1800s with the Blackwood family, wealthy, influential, and secretive. The patriarch, Nathaniel Blackwood, was a reclusive man known for his interest in the occult. It was rumored that he made a pact with dark forces to gain his immense wealth, a pact that ultimately led to his family's doom. One fateful night, screams echoed through the mansion, and the next morning the entire Blackwood family was found dead. Their bodies were twisted in unnatural positions, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The house was abandoned shortly thereafter, and it was said that their spirits never left. Years passed, and Blackwood Manor became a place of fear and superstition. Children dared each other to approach its gates, and teenagers whispered ghost stories around campfires. But no one was brave enough to venture inside, until a group of friends, eager for adventure and thrills, decided to spend a night there. Lisa, Tom, Rachel, and Mike were college students with a penchant for the paranormal. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a Ouija board, they made their way to Blackwood Manor one moonless night, determined to uncover its secrets. The air was thick with an eerie silence as they approached the mansion. The iron gates creaked open, and the friends stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. The house loomed before them, its dark silhouette menacing against the night sky. "This place gives me the creeps," Rachel muttered, clutching her flashlight tightly. "That's the point," Tom replied with a nervous chuckle. "We're here to find out if the stories are true." Inside, the house was even more unsettling. The air was stale, and the floorboards creaked with every step. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the remnants of old furniture were scattered about, covered in dust. They set up their equipment in the grand foyer, the dim light from their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. Lisa suggested they start with the Ouija board. As they sat in a circle and placed their hands on the planchette, a cold draft swept through the room. "Is there anyone here with us?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling slightly. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move. "Yes," it spelled out. "Who are you?" Mike asked, his eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Nathaniel," came the reply. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Nathaniel Blackwood. "Why are you here?" Tom asked. "Dark Pact," the board spelled out, and then the planchette flew off the board, skittering across the floor. Suddenly the temperature dropped, and their breath became visible in the cold air. They heard a low, guttural growl coming from the darkness. Lisa screamed as a shadowy figure appeared at the top of the grand staircase, an apparition of Nathaniel Blackwood, his eyes glowing with malevolence. "Leave this place," the spirit bellowed, his voice echoing through the mansion. "You are not welcome here." Panic set in, and the friends scrambled to gather their equipment. But as they moved, the house seemed to come alive. Doors slammed shut, trapping them in the foyer. The walls pulsated as if breathing, and ghostly whispers filled the air. Rachel was the first to be taken. As she backed away from the advancing spirit, a pair of spectral hands emerged from the wall, grabbing her and pulling her into the darkness. Her screams echoed through the house, then abruptly stopped. "We have to get out of here," Tom shouted, but the front door was locked tight and their efforts to break it down were futile. Lisa and Mike ran toward the back of the house, hoping to find another exit. As they passed through the kitchen, they were met with another horrifying sight: apparitions of the Blackwood family, their faces contorted in agony, reached out to them, begging for help. "We need to break the curse," Lisa cried. "It's the only way to stop this." Mike remembered the old library he had seen earlier. "There might be something in the library," he shouted, and they raced toward it, the ghostly wails of the Blackwood family following them. The library was a grand room, lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate book on a pedestal, Nathaniel Blackwood's grimoire. Lisa grabbed the book and frantically flipped through its pages. "There has to be a way to break the curse," she muttered. Finally, she found a ritual that might work, a cleansing spell to banish dark forces. As they prepared to perform the ritual, the spirit of Nathaniel Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his face twisted in rage. "You cannot undo what has been done," he roared. Undeterred, Lisa and Mike began the incantation. The house shook violently, and the air filled with a deafening roar. The spirit of Nathaniel lunged at them, but a bright light erupted from the grimoire, enveloping the room. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a final, agonized scream, Nathaniel's spirit was pulled into the light, and the house fell still. The front door creaked open, and Lisa and Mike stumbled outside, gasping for air. They looked back at the house, now eerily quiet, and knew the curse had been lifted. But their relief was short-lived. As they made their way back to the car, they realized Tom and Rachel were still inside. They turned back to the house, but the front door had closed again, and no amount of pounding would open it. The next morning, the townsfolk found Lisa and Mike huddled and trembling at the gates of Blackwood Manor. They were taken to the local hospital, where they recounted their harrowing experience. Blackwood Manor remains abandoned to this day, but the curse is far from broken. At night, the cries of Tom and Rachel can still be heard, and those who dare to approach the house are met with the same malevolent force that claimed the Blackwood family. The Dark Pact lives on, a reminder of the horrors that lie within the cursed walls of Blackwood Manor. The curse of Blackwood Manor remains an ominous reminder of the dark forces that may inhabit this place. The eerie legacy of Nathaniel Blackwood and his family serves as a stark warning to those who dare to explore the unknown. As the story of Blackwood Manor fades into the past, another horror story emerges from the shadows. This story takes us to the heart of rural Pennsylvania, where, in the midst of a dense forest, stood an old, dilapidated house known as the Willow Creek House. For decades, it had been abandoned, shrouded in rumors and dark tales. The most chilling of these stories was about a little girl named Emily, who had disappeared mysteriously many years ago. Her mother, a woman driven to madness by unknown torments, was suspected but never charged. Locals claim to have seen Emily's ghost, wandering and weeping in the dead of night. Against this backdrop of local lore, a young couple, Sarah and Mark, bought the house. They were enchanted by its rustic charm and the idea of restoring it to its former glory. Despite warnings from townsfolk, they moved in, eager to start their new life. They spent their days cleaning, painting, and making the house their own. But then the strange occurrences began. The first few days in Willow Creek House were a honeymoon of sorts for Sarah and Mark. They relished the tranquility, the birdsong in the mornings, and the serene rustle of leaves at night. Yet, as they peeled back layers of wallpaper and unearthed dusty relics of the past, a heavy sense of unease began to settle over them. One crisp autumn afternoon, while Mark was repairing a section of the roof, Sarah explored the attic further. Among the cobwebs and forgotten trunks, she discovered a child's toy chest. It was filled with porcelain dolls, all meticulously arranged, their glassy eyes staring lifelessly ahead. One doll in particular caught her eye. It was larger than the others, dressed in a delicate lace dress, but its face was cracked, giving it a sinister grin. As Sarah reached out to touch it, she heard a faint whisper like a breathless plea. "Help me!" She recoiled, her heart racing. Mark's voice from below broke the spell, calling her to help with the ladder. She hurriedly closed the chest, her hands trembling. That night, they were awoken by the sound of footsteps running down the hallway. Mark grabbed a flashlight and headed to the source, finding nothing but the cold, empty corridor. They returned to bed, unnerved, but tried to dismiss it as the creaking of an old house. The next day, while Sarah was in town buying supplies, Mark decided to investigate the basement. The air grew colder as he descended the creaky wooden steps. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. He noticed a large, rusted metal door, partially hidden behind stacks of firewood. With effort, he pried it open, revealing a small, damp room. The smell of decay was overpowering. Inside, he found a child's drawings pinned to the walls, crude, haunting depictions of a girl and a towering figure with wild eyes. On the floor, he saw a small, dusty music box. He wound it up, and a melancholic tune filled the air, sending chills down his spine. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the room was plunged into darkness. He felt a presence, something cold and malevolent, brushing against his skin. Panic surged through him as he struggled to open the door. Just as he was about to give up, it swung open, and he stumbled out, gasping for air. Mark didn't tell Sarah about his experience, not wanting to worry her. However, that night, the haunting escalated. The sound of Emily's sobbing grew louder, more insistent. The temperature in their bedroom dropped, and they could see their breath misting in the air. Sarah clutched Mark, her fear palpable. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Mark nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from the basement." They both dressed quickly and armed themselves with flashlights. As they descended, the sobbing turned into anguished screams. The basement was freezing, their breath visible in the flashlight beams. The music box was playing again, its haunting melody echoing off the walls. "Emily," Sarah called out tentatively, "we're here to help." The sobbing ceased abruptly. In the silence that followed, they heard a soft, childlike voice. "She won't let me leave." Suddenly, the air grew oppressive. The metal door to the small room slammed shut again, and this time it was followed by a loud banging, as if something or someone was trying to get out. Mark approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The banging stopped. A low, guttural laugh filled the basement, a laugh that chilled them to their very cores. It was Emily's mother. "You can't save her," she hissed. "She's mine forever." A sudden force threw Mark against the wall, and Sarah screamed. She saw the spectral figure of Emily's mother, her eyes wild with madness, her hands reaching for Mark. Sarah grabbed a nearby broom and swung it through the apparition, but it passed through harmlessly, the laughter growing louder. Mark struggled to his feet, grabbing Sarah's hand. "We need to get out of here," he shouted. They fled up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind them. They could still hear the haunting laughter and the faint sobbing of Emily. Exhausted and terrified, they barricaded themselves in their bedroom, praying for daylight. The next morning, they decided to leave Willow Creek House. They packed hastily, but as they prepared to leave, they discovered their car keys were missing. They searched frantically, but the keys were nowhere to be found. It was as if the house was conspiring to keep them there. Desperation mounting, Mark tried to force the car's ignition with a screwdriver, but it was futile. They were trapped. That night, the haunting reached a fever pitch. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air thick with malevolence. They heard Emily's voice clearer than ever, pleading for help. "Mommy's coming." The lights flickered, then went out completely. In the darkness, they saw the spectral form of Emily's mother, her eyes glowing with madness. She advanced on them, her hands outstretched. Mark and Sarah ran upstairs, seeking refuge in the attic. They barricaded the door with whatever they could find. As they huddled together, they heard Emily's voice again, this time closer. "Help me, please." Suddenly, the attic door burst open, and the malevolent spirit of Emily's mother stormed in. Sarah and Mark were thrown across the room by an unseen force. The ghostly figure of Emily appeared, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, no!" she cried. The room was filled with a deafening roar as the two spirits clashed. Objects flew around the attic, shattering against the walls. Sarah and Mark were pinned to the floor, unable to move. Emily's mother shrieked in fury, her form becoming more distorted and terrifying. Emily's ghost reached out to Sarah, her small hand glowing with a soft, ethereal light. "Help me," she whispered. Summoning all her strength, Sarah reached out and took Emily's hand. There was a blinding flash of light, and the attic fell silent. When Sarah and Mark opened their eyes, they were alone. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the temperature returned to normal. They stumbled downstairs, their bodies aching, their minds reeling from the ordeal. As they reached the front door, they found their car keys lying on the floor. Without a word, they grabbed them and fled the house, not daring to look back. The townsfolk were surprised to see them return, disheveled and traumatized. They recounted their experience to the local sheriff, who nodded gravely. "You're not the first to encounter the spirits of Willow Creek House," he said, "but you might be the last." Sarah and Mark moved away, leaving Pennsylvania behind. They never spoke of Willow Creek House again, but the memory haunted them for the rest of their lives. They knew that Emily's spirit had been freed, but the malevolent force of her mother still lingered in the shadows of that cursed house. To this day, Willow Creek House remains abandoned, a testament to the horrors that transpired within its walls. Those who dare to approach it at night swear they can hear the faint sobbing of a little girl and the chilling laughter of a mad woman, forever echoing through the empty halls. And then we move on to an even more eerie story that will take us to a small, forgotten village, hidden between dense forests that whispered where an old, abandoned house stood. Once upon a time, in a small, forgotten village nestled between dense, whispering woods, stood an old, abandoned house. Its dark windows seemed to watch anyone who dared to approach, and a chill always lingered in the air around it, even on the warmest days. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about the house, warning curious minds to stay away, for it was said to be cursed. One autumn evening, a group of 5 friends, eager for adventure, decided to explore the house. There was Jack, the brave leader, Emma, the skeptic, Michael, the history buff, Lily, the sensitive one who could feel things others couldn't, and Alex, the joker who didn't take anything seriously. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows, they made their way through the overgrown path leading to the house. Dead leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the air grew colder with each step they took closer. The door creaked open with an eerie groan, and the group stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the wooden floorboards moaned under their weight. The walls were lined with old, tattered wallpaper, peeling away to reveal dark, moldy patches. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like blood. As they explored the house, they found strange markings on the walls, symbols that Michael recognized from old texts about dark rituals. "These are protection symbols," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But they're inverted. They're meant to keep something in, not out." Lily shivered, feeling an icy hand brush against her arm. She turned, but no one was there. Her flashlight flickered, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to move on their own. "We should leave," she urged, but the others dismissed her fears, pressing further into the house. In one of the rooms, they found an old, dusty mirror covered with a heavy cloth. Curious, Alex pulled the cloth off, and they all gasped. The mirror was cracked, and the reflection it showed was not their own. Instead, it displayed a gruesome scene of blood and terror, with shadowy figures looming over them. The reflection seemed to writhe and twist, as if the mirror were a window into another, more sinister world. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped, and they could see their breath misting in the air. Whispers filled the room, indistinct but filled with malice, growing louder and more insistent. Jack, trying to stay calm, led the group to another part of the house, hoping to find another exit. They stumbled upon a hidden staircase leading down to a basement. Desperation drove them to descend, but as they reached the bottom, they were met with a horrifying sight. The basement was filled with old, rotting coffins, each one with a nameplate. To their horror, they saw their own names engraved on the coffins, with the current date marked as the date of death. Emma, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize it as a sick prank, but her voice trembled. "This can't be real," she whispered, her hands shaking. Suddenly, one of the coffins began to creak open. A skeletal hand emerged, followed by a figure that looked exactly like Jack, but twisted and decayed. The doppelganger lunged at the real Jack, and chaos erupted. The group screamed and scattered, running back up the stairs. They found themselves in a different part of the house, one that none of them recognized. The walls seemed to pulse and shift, the house itself alive and malevolent. They heard footsteps behind them, but when they turned, there was nothing there. They were being hunted by unseen forces. Michael, remembering the symbols, frantically searched for anything that could help. He found an old book, its pages filled with dark incantations. The book was bound in a leather that felt disturbingly warm to the touch, as if it were alive. He began to read aloud, hoping to break the curse. As he chanted, the house shook, and the whispers grew louder, turning into screams. The very walls seemed to close in, the house reacting violently to Michael's efforts. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the front door burst open, and the group ran out, not daring to look back. They didn't stop until they were far from the house, gasping for breath. When they finally looked back, the house was gone, replaced by an empty, barren field. The air around them was still and silent, as if the house had never existed. Years later, the villagers noticed that the house had reappeared, but this time it looked different. It was newer, well-kept, and inviting. Curious new residents moved in, only to vanish without a trace. The house, it seemed, was always hungry, always waiting for its next victims. And deep within its walls, the names on the coffins remained, waiting for the return of those who dared to escape its clutches. One day, as the sun set over the village, the house stood silent and foreboding once more. A shadow moved in the window, watching, waiting. The whispers started again, and the village held its breath, knowing that the cycle of horror was far from over. So, brave souls, our journey in the shadows is coming to an end for tonight. We hope that these stories have stirred your imagination and given you goosebumps. Remember, the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than you might think. If you enjoyed today's stories and want to hear more creepy and unexplained, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories of horror and intrigue. Click on the bell icon so you don't miss a single creepy story. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some doors are better left unopened.